just after lunchtime, my husband came up and woke me up, told me that Dr. Shipman had been on the phone. He said that Dr. Shipman had said that he was at Mrs. Berry's house and she wasn't very well. So my husband said, well, how bad is she? To which Dr. Shipman replied, well, how bad do you think it can get? And my husband said, well, has she passed away? And Dr. Shipman said yes.
Irene Berry had been a lively, outgoing woman. She regularly travelled to London to visit relatives, and she was known as someone with a great sense of humour.
I think she put people at ease. She would go to the community centre at the sheltered housing where she was, and she would always seem to be life and soul of the place.
Irene Berry died at home on a Sunday. Her death came out of the blue, a complete shock to her family and friends. She'd recently been unwell, but only with shingles. She'd been in a lot of pain, so she called for Dr. Shipman. He came out to visit her. It was from Irene's house that Shipman phoned Jean Darlington and her husband. When they went to the house, Shipman was still there.
He said, she's very comfortable, the fire's on, half a cup of tea there, you know, I'll come in with you. And she was just sat on the chair where she would normally sit with the fire on, a book and half a cup of tea. She just looked as though she was asleep.
But Jean was an accident and emergency nurse, and she was far from happy with his account of what had happened.
He said that she'd called him out because she had chest pain. Immediately I wondered, you know, well, why didn't he do something about it? He said he went away, he gave her a spray, a GTN spray, and said, we'll see how that goes. He said, but it didn't work. So I decided to go and come back and see how she was later, and bring the ECG machine with me, which seemed odd to me right at the time. And he said when he came back with the ECG machine, she was dead. If he didn't think it was a cardiac problem, why did he go for an ECG machine? And if he did, why didn't he get an ambulance?
But despite her reservations about the way he'd treated her mother, Jean Darlington never suspected the worst.
I felt concerned about my mother, but in such grief, I thought, how could he have done this, a GP with so many years' experience? But I certainly didn't think he would have done it on purpose. You don't think murder, you just think negligence.
Oh, this is the strangest thing. Here's my father dies 1 hour after Dr. Shipman comes, and here's my aunt dies under the same circumstances.
Why didn't you ever go to the police then by this time?
Because you trust the doctor.
Irene Berry was cremated, so any evidence of morphine was destroyed. And Shipman assured the family there was no need for a post-mortem. He put on the death certificate she died of a heart attack. But she'd never had heart problems. So, to cover his tracks, Shipman falsified her medical records to show a history of heart trouble where none had existed. Police were to find he'd done this in many other cases.
He was using them to convince a family that they had a previous heart condition or high blood pressure or whatever, which enabled him to give a cause of death and sign a death certificate. In many cases, to ensure that no post-mortem took place and that the body could be cremated.
But in the end, these forgeries would help to trap him. The fact that he'd backdated them was itself recorded in the computer's memory. When he was interviewed by police, Shipman was calm and unemotional, until confronted with evidence that he faked medical records.
I'll just remind you the date of this lady's death, 11th of May, 98. After 3 o'clock that afternoon, you have endorsed the computer with the date of the 1st of October, 97, which is 10 months prior. Chest pains.
I have no recollection of me putting that on the machine.
It's your passcode. It's your name.
It doesn't alter the fact I can't remember doing it.
You attended the house at 3 o'clock, and that's when you murdered this lady. You went back to the surgery and immediately started altering this lady's medical records. You tell me why you needed to do that.
There's no answer.
Despite his loss, Jim King knows he's been lucky, because Shipman failed to do to Jim what he'd done to others in his family. Remarkably, Jim King survived an attempt by Shipman to kill him. In 1996, recently married, Jim became ill. He was diagnosed as having cancer. The diagnosis later turned out to be wrong, but Jim was treated by Shipman with huge doses of morphine.
And he kept saying to us, well, you can take as much morphine as you wish, because of course it didn't really matter. I was dying anyway, so as long as it eased the pain, then you just keep taking it. And he prescribed me vast amounts of morphine.
Then, just before Christmas, he took a turn for the worse.
Jim was bad. He was in a bad way. I rang Dr. Shipman to have him come around and check him over.
He tested my chest and said that I had got a bad dose of pneumonia, and I got liquid on the lungs.
What was he proposing to do about that?
Well, I don't know really, because he just said I need to give him an injection, and at that time, my wife, I remember looking at her, and she looked a bit concerned about this.
He asked me if I wanted him to give him an injection, and I said no. I said, can we write out a prescription for him? He kept being a little bit persistent about it, and I kept telling him, no, I don't want it. He was a bit arrogant about it, kind of snotty attitude towards me, a little bit.
You think you saved your husband's life?
Yes, I do now. I know that now for sure.
I really strongly believe, and this is my belief, that, and my wife's, if he had given me that injection that day, I don't believe I would be here today. I really don't.
Patients like Jim were specially useful to Shipman. To kill, he needed illicit supplies of morphine. He got much of it from terminally ill patients.
What he tended to do is overprescribe to individuals who legitimately required diamorphine, certainly in the days just prior to them dying. What he would do then is go along to the home, offer to dispose of any access that was left at the house, and he would take that away.
And if Jim King had died from cancer, Shipman might well have obtained supplies of morphine in his name, morphine which he would add to his stockpile to use on other victims. But Jim King didn't have cancer. He cheated death twice. His family weren't so lucky. Shipman killed his aunt, Molly Dudley, in 1990. Then he murdered another aunt, Irene Berry, and his father, Jim King Sr. They are amongst the many victims whose deaths Shipman has not been charged with. But further charges are being considered by the prosecuting authorities. By the end of 1997, the rate at which Shipman's elderly patients were dying was not going unnoticed. But tragically, an opportunity to stop his murderous campaign was missed. The first serious concerns arose at the local undertakers. They'd noticed worrying patterns amongst Dr. Shipman's dead patients.
Anybody can die in a chair, can drop down dead in the street, but there's no set pattern. And Dr. Shipman's always seems to be the same, or very similar. Could be sat in a chair, could be lied on a settee, but I would say 90% was always fully clothed. There was never anything in the house that I saw that indicated the person had been ill. It just seemed as the person where they were had died. And there was something we didn't quite fit.
What did you do then?
Well, I actually had a word with Dr. Shipman at his surgery and asked him if there was any cause for concern, and he just said no, there isn't. He showed me that his certificate book that issues death certificates in.